General George S. Patton, Jr., U.S. Third Army Commander. His North African campaign created the tactical blueprint that forced Rommel himself to acknowledge American mobile warfare had evolved beyond imitation into innovation. You do not earn Erwin Rommel's respect. Not as an enemy. Not as an equal. Certainly not as an American. By 1943, Rommel had spent 3 years in North Africa turning the desert into a graveyard for Allied careers. British generals came with textbook tactics and left in disgrace. Commonwealth forces threw everything at him. Superior numbers, better supply lines, the weight of an empire, and still he danced around them like a master fencer toying with students. The Germans called him the Desert Fox. The British called him a ghost. His own men called him untouchable. He had studied warfare under the most rigorous military system on earth. He had written the book, literally written the manual, on infantry tactics that became doctrine across the Wehrmacht. He had commanded panzer divisions in France and watched the British Army crumble in 11 days. He understood movement, supply, psychology, and terrain at a level that transcended training. It was instinct sharpened by intellect. And he had nothing but contempt for American military capability. The United States, in Rommel's assessment, was a nation of factory workers playing soldier. They had resources, yes, endless resources, but resources without tactical sophistication were just targets waiting to be outmaneuvered. Americans fought with their wallets, not their minds. They were wealthy, naive, and predictable. This was the unshakable truth across German high command in early 1943. America could build tanks faster than Germany could destroy them, but they couldn't think faster. And in mobile desert warfare, thinking was everything. But in March of 1943, something changed in the sand. Something that made Erwin Rommel, the man who had humiliated Montgomery, embarrassed Auchinleck, and frustrated Churchill, sit down with his staff officers and say words no one expected to hear. Words that would be recorded in German intelligence reports and declassified decades later. Words that acknowledged a truth the Third Reich desperately wanted to deny. One American general understood mobile warfare better than anyone else the Allies had fielded. And his name was George S. Patton. George Smith Patton, Jr. turned 57 in November 1942, ancient by combat command standards, but age had only concentrated what was already distilled in him since childhood, an obsession with war. Not the politics of war. Not the morality of war. The pure mechanical art of breaking in enemy's will through speed, violence, and psychological dominance. He was born into California wealth but rejected comfort like it was poison. He read military history the way other men read novels. Hannibal, Alexander, Napoleon, Frederick the Great, absorbing every campaign, every flanking maneuver, every calculated risk. He attended Virginia Military Institute, then West Point, where his dyslexia nearly destroyed him but his competitive fury pulled him through. He competed in the 1912 Olympics in pentathlon. He designed the M1913 cavalry saber because the existing design offended his sense of lethality. He chased Pancho Villa through Mexico in motorized vehicles when everyone else was still on horseback. Everything about Patton was sharp angles and forward motion. His face looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull chisel, all hard lines and intensity. He wore custom uniforms, ivory-handled revolvers, a permanent expression that vacillated between fury and contempt. He believed in reincarnation and claimed to remember dying in past battles. He wrote poetry. He cried over dead soldiers and cursed living ones. He was profane, brilliant, unstable, and utterly committed to a singular idea: victory through audacity. When America entered World War II, Patton was given command of the newly formed armored divisions, tanks, the future of warfare, the modern cavalry. And in November 1942, he led those tanks into North Africa as part of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion designed to trap Rommel between British forces in the east and American forces in the west. The plan was sound. The execution was a disaster. American forces were green, painfully, catastrophically green. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, Rommel's Afrika Korps tore through American lines like tissue paper. U.S. forces lost 6,500 men, 183 tanks, and 200 artillery pieces in 4 days. Officers panicked. Troops broke. The entire II Corps collapsed in disarray. It was the first major engagement between American ground forces and the Wehrmacht, and it validated every contemptuous belief Rommel held about American military incompetence. But there was a problem. Rommel hadn't faced Patton yet. After Kasserine, Eisenhower made a decision that changed the trajectory of the North African campaign. He relieved the II Corps commander and installed Patton. Not to hold ground. Not to dig in and absorb punishment. but to attack. Patton arrived at 2 Corps headquarters in Jebel Kouif, Tunisia, on March 6, 1943. He stepped out of his staff car wearing a freshly pressed uniform, polished helmet, riding boots, and those ivory revolvers strapped to his hips. He gathered his officers, men still rattled from Kasserine, still uncertain, still thinking defensively, and he told them something they would never forget. "Gentlemen, tomorrow we attack. If we are not victorious, let no one come back alive." He wasn't speaking metaphorically. Patton spent the next week transforming 2 Corps from a defeated army into a weapon. He instituted brutal discipline. Every soldier had to wear a helmet, even in rear areas. Uniform violations meant instant punishment. Saluting became mandatory everywhere all the time. He fired officers who hesitated. He visited frontline positions personally, screaming at men to dig faster, move faster, think faster. And then he did something that stunned both his own staff and German intelligence. He attacked not where Rommel expected, but where Rommel thought Americans were too incompetent to attack. On March 17, 1943, Patton launched Operation WOP against the Axis-held town of Gafsa. It wasn't a strategic jewel, it was a prelude. The real target was El Guettar, a critical road junction 30 miles east that controlled access to the coastal plains. If Patton took El Guettar, he would cut off Rommel's supply lines and force the Afrika Korps into a fighting retreat. But El Guettar was defended by the Italian Centauro Division and German panzer elements. It sat in a valley surrounded by hills, a natural kill box. Conventional doctrine said you softened it with artillery, then advanced slowly with infantry support. You minimized risk. You preserved force. Patton did the opposite. He sent the 1st Infantry Division straight into the valley at dawn, supported by the 1st Armored Division's Combat Command C. No prolonged bombardment. No cautious probing. Just speed and violence and the absolute certainty that hesitation was death. And on the hills overlooking that battlefield, German observers radioed back to their commanders with reports that didn't make sense. The Americans were fighting like Germans. March 23, 1943. Dawn breaks over El Guettar. The 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, moves into position along a ridgeline overlooking the valley floor. They've been advancing for 6 days, pushing through Axis resistance with an aggression that surprises even themselves. Patton has been everywhere, his jeep bouncing between units, screaming at colonels, encouraging privates, demanding speed above all else. Now they're here. The objective. The place where doctrine says they should stop, consolidate, and wait for overwhelming force. Patton issues a single order. Attack. At 0600 hours, American artillery opens fire. Not the traditional hours-long bombardment, just enough to wake up the Italians and let them know what's coming. 30 minutes of shells, then silence. Then the 18th Infantry Regiment starts moving down into the valley. Axis observers watch through field glasses, confused. This isn't how Americans fight. Americans are supposed to be cautious, methodical, overwhelming through material superiority. These soldiers are advancing like stormtroopers, fast and loose, covering ground in bounds, not waiting for perfect coordination. The Italian Centauro Division opens fire. Machine gun positions chatter from fortified emplacements. Mortars walk across the valley floor, throwing up geysers of sand and rock. American soldiers hit the ground, return fire, get up, keep moving. By 0800 hours, the 18th Infantry has seized the first set of hills overlooking the town. They're taking casualties, real casualties, the kind that make units falter, but they're not stopping. Sergeants are screaming. Lieutenants are waving men forward. The momentum is relentless. And in his command post 5 miles back, Patton is pacing like a caged animal, listening to radio reports, demanding updates every 10 minutes. His staff officers watch him with a mixture of awe and terror. He's not managing the battle, he's willing it forward through sheer intensity. At 1000 hours, German intelligence radios a priority message to Rommel's headquarters in Tunis. The Americans at El Guettar are not behaving according to established patterns. They are using combined arms tactics with unexpected sophistication. Armored units are exploiting infantry gains immediately, not waiting for consolidation. Artillery is being repositioned aggressively, moving forward with the advance instead of staying in static positions. Rommel reads the report. He requests more information. Who is commanding 2 Corps? The answer comes back, Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Rommel knows the name. Patton commanded a tank brigade in World War I. He studied cavalry tactics. He's written papers on mobile warfare. But he's never commanded at this scale, never faced the Afrika Korps. Rommel makes a decision. He orders the 10th Panzer Division to counterattack at Guettar. Not to probe. Not to delay. To destroy. If this American general wants to fight like a German, Rommel will show him what that actually means. March 23, 1943. 1,430 hours. The 10th Panzer Division, 30 Mark IV tanks, 20 Mark III tanks, self-propelled guns and motorized infantry, rolls toward Guettar from the northeast. This is Rommel's signature move, the concentrated armored counterstrike, designed to smash through enemy positions before they can consolidate. It's worked against the British dozens of times. American forward observers see the dust cloud first, then the tanks, then the horrible realization of what's coming. Radio calls flood back to command, Panzers. Grid reference 4-7-2-9. Estimate 50-plus vehicles. They're coming straight at us. In any other American unit, this would be the moment of panic. Kasserine Pass proved that American armor couldn't stand toe-to-toe with veteran German panzer crews. The psychological advantage alone was worth 10 tanks. But Patton has been preparing for this exact moment. He doesn't order a retreat. He doesn't call for air support. He doesn't hesitate for even 1 second. He orders every available anti-tank gun, every concealed tank destroyer, and every artillery piece within range to hold fire until the panzers reach the kill zone. Then he tells them to destroy everything. The 10th Panzer Division advances in a wedge formation, textbook German armor tactics, designed to concentrate force at a single breakthrough point. The Mark IVs are in front, long 75mm guns that can penetrate American Sherman armor at 1,500 yards. The infantry is mounted on half-tracks, ready to exploit the breach. They're confident. They've done this before. Americans break when tanks appear. 1,800 yards. American positions are visible now, scattered across the hills. 1,500 yards. No fire yet. Maybe they're running. Maybe they've already abandoned their guns. 1,200 yards. Still no fire. The panzers accelerate. The breakthrough is seconds away. 900 yards. Every American gun opens fire at once. 37mm anti-tank guns. 75mm pack howitzers. M3 tank destroyers hidden in hull-down positions. Artillery batteries firing over open sights. Everything. The lead panzer explodes, its turret lifting clean off the chassis and tumbling through the air like a discarded toy. The tank behind it swerves and hits a mine. Patton ordered minefields laid during the night, something the Germans didn't expect Americans to execute that quickly. A third panzer takes a direct hit from a 105mm howitzer shell and erupts in flames. In 90 seconds, the entire front rank of the 10th Panzer Division is burning. The German commander tries to maneuver, tries to flank, tries to execute the tactical flexibility that has made the Wehrmacht legendary. But every time his tanks shift, American fire shifts with them. Patton has positioned his guns in overlapping fields of fire, creating a web of destruction that punishes every movement. The panzers retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal. A retreat. German armor fleeing from American guns. At his command post, Patton receives the casualty reports. The 10th Panzer Division lost 32 tanks, 11 self-propelled guns, and approximately 200 men. American losses: 14 killed, 31 wounded, 0 tanks destroyed. It's not just a victory. It's a statement. That night, Patton writes in his diary, "We proved today that Americans can beat the best Germany has. The key is simple. Hit them first. Hit them hard. Never let them think." But the real impact isn't in Tunisia. It's 60 miles northwest in a headquarters building in Tunis, where Erwin Rommel sits with his intelligence officers reviewing the battle reports from Guettar. The numbers don't lie. American forces under Patton's command executed a defensive ambush with near-perfect timing, lured experienced panzer units into a prepared kill zone, and destroyed a combined arms assault that should have broken their lines. Rommel asks for everything available on Patton. Service record, tactical history, published papers, psychological profile. German intelligence compiles a dossier over the next 48 hours. And what Rommel reads forces him to confront an uncomfortable truth. George Patton isn't imitating German mobile warfare. He understands it at a foundational level. He studied the same theorists, Guderian, Liddell Hart, Fuller. He's internalized the same principles: speed, concentration, psychological shock. But he's applying them with an American twist: overwhelming firepower and absolute disregard for his own safety. Patton is, in Rommel's assessment, the most dangerous kind of opponent. A true believer in offensive warfare who has the resources of American industry behind him and the audacity to use them without hesitation. On March 28, 1943, Rommel dictates a memo to his staff. The exact wording will be debated by historians for decades, but the message is clear and unambiguous. The American General Patton is the most dangerous opponent we have faced in North Africa. He understands mobile warfare. He does not hesitate. He must be tracked and countered at all times. German intelligence begins devoting extraordinary resources to monitoring Patton. Radio intercepts, aerial reconnaissance, captured prisoner interrogations focus specifically on Patton's whereabouts. Abwehr agents in neutral countries are tasked with finding information about his next assignment. This isn't standard operating procedure. This is the treatment reserved for Churchill, for Eisenhower, for strategic threats to the Reich. Rommel has just elevated an American general to the level of existential danger. And Patton? Patton is just getting started. If you find this kind of forgotten history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of tactical genius and hard-earned respect deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. Over the next 6 weeks, Patton's 2 Corps continues advancing across Tunisia. They take Gafsa. They secure the eastern hills. They link up with British 8th Army forces pushing from the east, trapping the Axis armies in a shrinking pocket along the coast. On April 7, 1943, American forces capture Hill 369 overlooking the critical port of Bizerta. Patton personally leads a reconnaissance patrol to the summit, standing fully exposed on the ridgeline while German artillery shells scream overhead. His staff officers beg him to take cover. He refuses. He wants the enemy to see him. He wants them to know he's there. German observation posts radio back. American general observed grid 8-4-1-2. Positive identification. Patton. Within an hour, Luftwaffe bombers are redirected to hit that specific hill. Not because it's strategically vital, because Patton is there. He's become a target worth diverting operational resources to kill. By May 1943, Axis resistance in North Africa collapses. On May 13, the last German and Italian units surrender. Over 275,000 Axis soldiers are taken prisoner. The Mediterranean is secure. The pathway to invading Sicily and Italy is open. Patton's 2 Corps has been in sustained combat for 9 weeks. They've advanced over 200 miles through defended terrain. They've captured over 40,000 prisoners, destroyed or captured hundreds of vehicles, and fundamentally altered the German perception of American military capability. But for Rommel, the damage is already done. He's been recalled to Germany in March, officially for health reasons, but the timing is telling. He leaves North Africa just as Patton arrives. Some historians believe this is coincidental. Others suggest Rommel recognized that his tactical advantage, his ability to outthink Allied commanders, had evaporated the moment Patton took the field. In his personal papers, later recovered and published, Rommel writes extensively about the American threat. He mentions Patton specifically in multiple entries, always with a tone of grudging respect. He compares Patton's tactics to those of von Manstein and Guderian, the Reich's own masters of mobile warfare. He warns other Wehrmacht commanders that American forces under Patton's leadership should never be underestimated. He writes, "In Patton, the Americans have found a commander who thinks like we do but fights with resources we can only dream of. This combination is perhaps the most dangerous we will face in this war." The German High Command takes Rommel's assessment seriously. When Patton is assigned to command the 7th Army for the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, German intelligence tracks his movements obsessively. They intercept his communications. They analyze his supply requisitions. They try to predict where he will strike. And they're terrified that they can't. During the Sicily campaign, Patton executes an end-run maneuver that captures Palermo in just 4 days, cutting off Italian units and forcing a German evacuation. Wehrmacht after-action reports describe the advance as reckless and impossible to counter, because Patton moves faster than German intelligence can track him. By August 1943, just 5 months after Guettar, every German commander in the Mediterranean theater knows Patton's name. They know his tactics. They know his aggressive philosophy. And they know that wherever he appears, the battle will be brutal and fast. But Rommel's most significant contribution isn't his tactical assessment. It's his strategic warning. In September 1943, now assigned to inspect Atlantic Wall defenses in France, Rommel writes a detailed memo to Field Marshal von Rundstedt about the anticipated Allied invasion of Europe. He lists the greatest threats to German defensive strategy. At the top of the list, General George S. Patton. Rommel argues that Patton is the only Allied commander with the audacity and skill to execute a deep armored penetration into France. He recommends that German panzer reserves be positioned specifically to counter a Patton-led invasion. He suggests that killing or capturing Patton should be a strategic priority equal to disrupting Allied logistics. This assessment directly influences German defensive planning for D-Day. When the Allies execute Operation Fortitude, the elaborate deception that convinces Hitler that the invasion will come at Calais, not Normandy, the key element that makes it believable is the fake assignment of Patton to command the fictional 1st U.S. Army Group. Hitler believes it because Rommel has told him that Patton is the most dangerous American general. Of course Patton would lead the main invasion. It's the only logical choice. So the Germans keep 19 divisions frozen at Calais, waiting for Patton, while the real invasion happens 150 miles away at Normandy. Rommel's respect for Patton becomes a weapon the Allies use to win the war. The impact of Rommel's admission ripples far beyond North Africa. At the strategic level, it changes how German high command allocates resources. After Tunisia, any sector where Patton might appear receives priority intelligence coverage and reinforcement. When Patton's Third Army is activated in July 1944 for the Normandy breakout, German commanders recognize his tactical signature immediately: the rapid advances, the deep penetrations, the relentless pressure, and they panic. Field Marshal von Kluge writes to Berlin on August 4, 1944, after Patton's armored columns smashed through German lines at Avranches, "Patton is driving into our rear areas with a speed we cannot match. We have no effective counter. If he is not stopped, Army Group B will be encircled." He isn't stopped. By August 25, Patton's Third Army liberates Paris, having advanced 400 miles in 3 weeks. By September they've crossed into Germany itself. But Rommel's influence extends into doctrine as well. After the war, the U.S. Army conducts extensive analysis of what made Patton's tactics so effective. They interview German officers who faced him. They review captured German intelligence reports. They study the battles at Guettar, Sicily, France, and Germany. What they discover is that Patton succeeded not because he invented new tactics, but because he executed old tactics with a level of aggression and speed that overwhelmed enemy decision-making. He forced opponents to react rather than plan. He created chaos and then exploited it before anyone could restore order. This becomes the foundation for American armored doctrine during the Cold War. Speed, initiative, disruption. The entire concept of air-land battle, the strategy designed to counter Soviet armor in Europe, is built on principles Patton demonstrated in Tunisia in 1943. Even today, at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Patton's North African campaign is taught as a case study in offensive operations. The Battle of Guettar specifically is analyzed for its use of terrain, timing, and combined arms coordination. And German military historians? They still debate Rommel's assessment. Some argue he overestimated Patton, that the Desert Fox was simply tired and defeated by the time he left Africa. Others point to the evidence: Patton's record, the German intelligence resources devoted to tracking him, the influence his reputation had on strategic decisions. But the most compelling evidence is this: after Guettar, German commanders never underestimated American forces again. The contempt that defined early engagements, the assumption that Americans were soft, naive, and tactically incompetent, vanished. One battle, one general, one admission from the most respected military mind in the Wehrmacht. That's all it took to change the calculus of the war. Erwin Rommel never faced Patton in direct combat again. By the time Patton's Third Army was rampaging across France in 1944, Rommel was recovering from injuries sustained when his staff car was strafed by Allied fighters. In October 1944, implicated in the plot to assassinate Hitler, Rommel was given a choice: public trial and execution or suicide with honors and protection for his family. He chose suicide. He was 52 years old. But before he died, he told his son Manfred something that would be recorded in post-war interviews. Of all the Allied commanders, only Patton truly understood what von Clausewitz meant when he wrote that war is the continuation of politics by violent means. Patton saw war as an art form that required total commitment. That made him lethal. George S. Patton Jr. survived the war, but only by months. On December 9, 1945, his Cadillac staff car collided with a U.S. Army truck near Mannheim, Germany. Patton suffered a broken neck. He died 12 days later in a military hospital, paralyzed and conscious at age 60. He never made it home. He's buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery, among the 5,000 soldiers of his Third Army who died in combat. His grave is identical to theirs, a simple white cross. The only difference is the line of visitors that never stops. Soldiers, historians, veterans who served under him. People who just want to stand in the presence of something fierce. The story of Rommel's admission, the moment the Desert Fox told his staff that Patton was the most dangerous opponent they faced, is documented in multiple sources. German intelligence reports recovered after the war. Interviews with Rommel's staff officers conducted by Allied historians. Rommel's own papers and letters. But the real proof isn't in documents. It's in decisions. The decision to dedicate reconnaissance assets to tracking one American general. The decision to position Panzer reserves specifically to counter his anticipated moves. The decision to make his elimination a strategic priority equal to destroying supply depots and airfields. You don't do that for a mediocre opponent. You don't dedicate those resources to someone you don't respect. Rommel gave Patton the highest compliment one warrior can give another. He took him seriously. And in the brutal calculus of World War II, where millions died and entire nations hung in the balance, being taken seriously by the enemy's best commander was the difference between victory and defeat. Today, at the General George Patton Museum at Fort Knox, Kentucky, there's an exhibit dedicated to the North African campaign. It includes maps of Guettar, photographs of the 10th Panzer Division's destroyed vehicles, and a translated excerpt from Rommel's March 28, 1943 memo. Visitors stand in front of that exhibit and read Rommel's words, "The American General Patton is the most dangerous opponent we have faced." And they understand what that meant. It meant that for the first time German commanders feared an American general the way British commanders had feared Rommel. It meant the psychological advantage that had carried the Wehrmacht through Poland, France, and North Africa was gone. It meant that from Tunisia forward, every German officer who faced American armor had to plan for the possibility that Patton was on the other side. Fear is a weapon. Respect is armor. Patton earned both in 90 days of desert combat. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we bring you the moments that changed wars, the soldiers who changed history, and the stories that deserve to be told. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. We love hearing from you and we love knowing this community spans the globe. Thank you for ensuring that General George S. Patton Jr. and the thousands of men who fought at Guettar do not disappear into silence. They earned Rommel's respect. They deserve ours.